Welcome to Counsel Culture, the Business of Law podcast brought to you by Byfield. Good morning, Michael. Welcome back to another episode of Counsel Culture by Byfield. How are you today?
I'm well, thanks. Enjoying the sunshine and looking forward to a bit of a holiday coming up next week. But it's great to be on the podcast, and yeah, looking forward to discussing all things business of law with you today.
Yes, exactly. Tell us where you're off to, Michael, on your holiday.
I always go to Egypt because that's where my wife's family live on. They've got a place on the Red Sea, so very much looking forward to a little bit of time in the sun and away from the office.
Perfect. Okay, well, I guess we'll just delve straight into our first topic that we have, which is more news on Trump and how law firms are going about dealing with his, dare I say, attack on the legal field. We've had some law firms that have decided to sort of pay him off, and we've had some firms on the other side as well. What's your take on the most recent developments of this week, Michael?
Look, I mean, it's going to be very difficult to know what the longer term ramifications are. Other than the level of political interference in the legal sector is clearly not a good thing, and I don't think anybody, whether they're firms that have chosen to do a deal to prioritize stability of business, etc., or firms that have decided to fight, I think any of them would think that this level of political interference is a good thing. Who's done the right thing is going to be very hard to say. We're going to have to see that over a period of time. I think firms that are targeted, I can understand the need to take decisions in the interests of the business. It continues to be pretty extraordinary, though, to have this going on, and I think that when it comes to the pro bono commitments, etc., there is a US president who likes big numbers. Whether those numbers are really meaningful or not, it's hard to say. Speaking to a client who was making some observations about how real, was opining about how if he has any interest whatsoever in them actually translating into anything, or if he just wants big numbers to be able to say at a press conference. So it's hard to know. But I don't know if is there $500 million of pro bono legal work to do for veterans causes. I don't know. Over a long enough time period, maybe. But and if inflation were to take off again, who knows? But the pro bono commitments. It will be interesting to see how that actually plays out. Obviously, it continues to go down not that great within firms, within the legal community. You've had some of the firms that have done deals have faced some resignations, which is probably a price they're going to pay. There's going to be questions around talent and who goes where. I think there was a law school that said that they were boycotting one of the firms that had done a deal. Again, how meaningful that is and how sustained that is, I don't know. I think the reality is that as soon as one top firm has done a deal, it kind of guarantees that the White House, particularly given Trump's approach to transactional approach to life and doing deals is what he's all about. It just guarantees that one after another, the expectation is that firms that were going to be targeted with an executive order will be expected to do a deal instead, and that's kind of what's happening. So one after another, that's probably what we're going to see. It seems that like the price tag is $100 million in pro bono assistance, and effectively getting rid of any diversity programs that might be deemed to be unhelpful according to the Trump worldview. And obviously that raised a lot of questions around how real were the commitments that were made over the past decade, et cetera, et cetera. Versus how much can you actually keep of the actual spirit of the commitments, but you're just changing some words that in effect the current administration is offended by. So again, all of those things are to be worked out. But there are issues around the interplay between what's happening in the US and regulatory requirements here in the UK around diversity reporting, SRA obligations around diversity, etc. And the lexicon, the lexicon around mandatory reporting and obligations to support diversity contain the word diversity here. So there is a line for firms to find or to walk, because just because things are changing in the US does not automatically change your regulatory obligations or your legal obligations in other countries. The US is very powerful. However, the extraterritorial effect of pronouncements by Trump does not extend to changing the wording of UK UK laws or regulatory requirements. So, and at the moment, they still say diversity. That might be a banned word in the US now, but diversity remains a thing that has to be taken into account here. And it puts firms in a difficult position, but they have to be really careful, I think, not to compromise themselves in terms of those obligations that continue to exist here. And if they get it wrong, they're just swapping one problem out for another one. You could say that other problem is a smaller one or whatever, but generally speaking, I think there is a huge materiality to the risk around the reputational risk and the legal risk around firms not complying. Well, it is absolutely material for any firm to demonstrate its ability to absolutely comply with its legal and regulatory obligations, whether they relate to reporting, whether they relate to how they employ people, whatever it might be. So, it is a hard thing to find the right line, and not every firm's going to get it right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a brilliant way of putting it, Michael. As we say on every podcast that we've done so far, there's no way of knowing how this is going to affect law firms, but I think that's a brilliant overview, especially of the way it could potentially affect the UK. Moving on to firm financials, we've seen that Orrick is up revenue by 6.2%, and Simpson Thacher's revenue has jumped by 23%. What are your thoughts on this in terms of how this coincides with the market in terms of deal volume? This year has been the lowest in a decade. We've seen reported by the FT this week. Yeah, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, obviously, 2024 was a really good year for another stellar year. I think stellar is it seems to be obligatory to use that word these days when you're talking about big law financials. But I think it was 9% actually, not 6% for Orrick. But we're talking about double-digit or high single-digit growth in terms of both revenues and profits. I think some firms, Simpson Thacher's one, I think it was 24% growth, which is huge, and that's fantastic. Again, the world has changed quite a bit. There was a sense of corporate optimism in December where stock markets were reaching record highs. There were expectations of the M&A market really roaring back, and deal volumes shooting through the roof in 2025. I think economic reality has collided with the sort of Trump-led policy agenda, and obviously that's starting to come to a head further with the tariffs that were announced yesterday the reciprocal tariffs, which I think the world is very much still absorbing. It seems to be that they've been calculated on a quite a baffling methodology, according to the press, and in terms of that and some of the other things that have been announced, you're getting further stresses on the global economy, and that translates through in terms of potentially higher inflation. That means interest rates don't fall as much as they would. Lower interest rates are vital for particularly private equity transactions. So I don't think we're going to see the avalanche of deals coming back, but that is slightly offset by the fact that if you have got high tariffs, then in some cases it will make sense to invest directly in manufacturing facilities, etc., in certain countries. Obviously, that's what Trump's whole thing, whole shtick is about. Putting up these tariff barriers, which then incentivize people to manufacture in the US rather than overseas and then exporting into the US. So whether that is going to play out in the way that he envisages, who knows? I mean, it seems quite unlikely, but it's extreme. But that may offset elements of the stresses put on globalization and cross-border transactions more broadly. But generally speaking, I think the tariff impact, the benefit of added inward investment for people who want to sell into the US and manufacturing in the US, I think is tiny compared to the overall global impact of disruption to the economy, stresses on smaller economies who, Vietnam, etc., like mid-tier or lower income countries that are now facing huge tariffs to sell into one of their biggest export markets, and probably feel justifiably aggrieved. And the inflationary impact potentially in the US, meaning that if interest rates stay higher than they otherwise would be, that's going to be very difficult for deal volumes to come back because of the importance of cost-effective leverage to be able to get deals done. And all that said, uncertainty, challenges, more difficult investment environments mean that there's and legal complexity means lots of work for lawyers. And the question is whether that additional work, because of the uncertainty and the complexity, is enough to compensate for lower than expected deal volumes. I suspect it probably is, largely speaking, or at least for a time. And there is a huge amount of private equity deals that were done over the past few years, which are still sort of working through the system, or where there's lots of legal work to be done in making those investments work, but there's probably running out of road with that sort of the pass the parcel of private equity assets, which was a feature of the last couple of years in a higher interest rate environment, and it is a prerequisite for rates to continue to come down, I think, for a real deal boom, because the cost of debt is a massive driver of transactional activity.
Mm. No, absolutely. There's so much there to unpack. We could do a whole different podcast, I suppose, on the tariffs, etc., that are going to affect law firms or potentially bringing more work for them. As Ben said the other week, it's a great time to be a trade lawyer. So moving on here, we've got a great sort of headline from Global Legal Post by Ben Edwards on Monday, which talks about Legal Services Board rebukes SRA and BSB for failures in what is termed to be a stinging report. So the LSB has highlighted concerning shortfalls in regulatory performance at the Solicitors Regulation Authority and Bar Standards Board. Michael, over to you here.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's good that there is at least somebody that can tick off the regulator rather than the regulator being just the sole being solely able to tick everybody else off or put them in the dock. I think it is kind of alarming that both the main legal, the most important legal regulators, without no disrespect to the Costs Lawyer Standards Board or the Institute of Chartered Accountants, but I think the SRA and the BSB are the sort of biggest legal sector regulators that the LSB oversees, and for them scoring red on certain standards, it's not great. I mean, operational delivery seems to be a particular challenge, and that's important, right? Because you can have the best policies in the world, but if you're not able to actually operationalize them effectively, then that's not good regulation. So it does demonstrate that the LSB has been sort of listening and has carefully monitored what's happened. I think it's driven for the BSB. It's kind of just being there are things happening. There are overhauls of policies. There is modernization going on. But it just seems to be very slow and a bit amateurish, reading between the lines. The SRA is a bit more significant in that the concerns crystallized around the Axiom Inc. collapse, where the SRA's the oversight of deals and mergers and the investigation side of things, clearly things were falling between the cracks and people were not talking to each other, and that was mishandled in a way which both undermines the public trust in the legal profession, which the SRA is supposed to be the guardian of, and also the legal profession itself trust in the SRA to be able to do its job effectively. So you had a sort of double whammy there, where members of the public who had money sitting with Axiom Inc. in good faith as part of property transactions, etc., have had to be kind of bailed out, and rightly so by the profession because of wrongdoing. And at the same time, now costs have increased to cover that for the profession as a whole, and it's only right that the SRA is accountable for mistakes, and that improvements are demanded of it in that regard. I'm sure there's a lot more to it, but the other thing that they were very much pulled up on was mishandling the pass rate data for the SQE. Relating to training providers, relating to affordability, design and quality, etc., and that means that it's another really key aspect of the role of regulator, which is around getting professional qualifications and getting people into the profession in the right way, with the right training, with the right standards, academic qualifications and standards, is also being called into question. So you've got some quite fundamental things going on here, both in terms of the public trust, the profession's trust, because obviously the profession is not going to like the regulator. You're never going to like your regulator, but you should respect and trust your regulator to a degree to do what it needs to do. And that sort of respect and trust has been undermined. The public trust has been undermined, and also this kind of entry into the profession aspect. Confidence in the ability to run and manage that has also been undermined. So it's not a very pretty picture, and there needs to be reform kind of on multiple fronts. And so the SQE thing, again, it has that has a real impact on people's lives, and I think you've had some thoughts on that as well. I don't know if you wanted to add to it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we've seen it's been published this week that the SQE pass rate has went up by 56% after the record low of 44% last summer. This is still pretty low, in my opinion. So I think that there's a lot of challenges and sort of controversies there surrounding the SQE. And I mean, this does fall, I suppose, onto the regulator. We've also got sort of, is this the right pathway to the legal profession? Could other ways and means be implemented instead of these sort of hard and fast rules? We've had one candidate's experience published as well this week, which again, depending on where you sit, could be quite shocking. So after failing one of their exams, from apparently a top 20 firm, they she received a letter from the firm asking to receive their funding back that they had given her over those 2 years. Um, this is an interesting story in my opinion. I mean, it is almost, if you fail, then that's you're out, and we want our money back. Was there any sort of personal element there? Was it just a sort of almost like a factory element? Like if you don't get it right first time, you're out, and we don't really care. Give us our money back, which is quite interesting. There was also a point made about, if this person ever does get their qualified as a solicitor and they go in house, will they ever sort of work for that firm? Will they deter, hiring that firm out again? Which is quite an interesting sort of point. So, yeah, I mean, what do you think about that, Michael?
So I think this has been since time immemorial. The qualification process has been subject to criticism, and firms have been criticised for trying to claim costs back from people who fail, etc., etc., etc. So this is a long old story, but it's vital to get it right because this is people's lives, right? People are investing serious amounts of money. When we think about social mobility, when we think about barriers to access to the profession, it's, I know diversity is a banned word these days, but perhaps we could talk instead. I'm not aware of social mobility having yet been made a term that we can't talk about, and making sure that, yes, somebody who comes from a modest background might have to spend more, they might have more debt to start with, but they absolutely need to have the same ability to access the profession as anybody else. And that includes if something goes wrong. I think there's somebody who might fail or whatever. If they face costs, then maybe they've got parents who can cover it and things like that. But if you don't have that, and in good faith you've been fighting hard and doing your best, and you fail at the final hurdle, you should not be hugely penalised on top of that, and be facing sort of clawbacks of costs and things, and that's where it's just not acceptable. It's not acceptable. If somebody has done things in good faith, it might say the letter of the agreement, the letter of the law might say, or the letter of your contract might say that you'll be liable for costs if you don't pass, but it doesn't happen a huge amount. And I just think it cannot be in any way good for, social mobility or access to the profession if people of modest means have that hanging over them, because things happen in life. People don't always deliver or succeed in the way that they expect to.
I completely agree with you there, Michael, on every point you made, in terms of the social mobility aspect. Now, just to end on a sort of lighter note, it's been reported by Angus Simpson at Legal Cheek that the BBC has unveiled a high octane legal drama following the lives of young Glasgow lawyers. So I don't know if you've ever seen Industry before on BBC, but it's kind of reminding me of maybe a legal version of Industry, which I'm quite excited to see how it pans out. I mean, we've had numerous legal shows in the past. We've had Suits. We've had. Remind me of any other ones, Michael. It's escaping me now.
I remember one from a very long time ago called This Life, which
Okay.
which probably was out when a long time ago anyway, probably like
Yeah.
20 odd years ago, and was a really big deal at the time, showing the sort of lives of aspiring young lawyers in in London. So yes, I don't know. Look, I don't know. How exciting is being a lawyer in Glasgow? You tell me.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't know personally. I did study in Edinburgh, so I have absolutely no idea about Glasgow, but it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, it's a different type of law in Scotland. It's supposed to focus on court, which again is completely different to down in England. So I'm not entirely sure how it's all going to play out, but it's something to maybe keep our eye on, and maybe see how the legal profession reacts to it if they do give it a watch. I know a lot of lawyers in my heyday interviewing lawyers, we used to ask them sort of who would you play if you were on a TV show, or who was your inspiration, or what was your inspiration for getting into law, and a few definitely quoted Suits as their inspiration for going into the legal profession. So do not underestimate legal dramas. They could inspire the workforce of tomorrow. So yeah, I suppose we'll keep an eye on it. If there's any sort of interesting takes, we'll definitely share.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's a good one to end on. A little bit lighter than the rest of the show today,
Yeah,
which quite a lot of
exactly.
depressing topics.
I know, I know. As always, the news is always a bit like that, though, isn't it? But yes, well, thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll speak soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to Council Culture, the Business of Law podcast brought to you by Byfield. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and join us again next week, where we'll be discussing some more of the biggest stories in the legal sector.